Today, we are going to talk about retro commissioning and ESPC. And the good news is Woody is presenting. Woody is a kick-ass presenter. I've seen him present a few times at World Energy, well, it used to be called the World Energy Engineering Congress, and now it's a World. He's really good. He's a regular there. He's always presenting because he's that good. And I'm going to let Woody actually tell us about himself. And that's it. I'm going to check out. I'll be here, taking notes, and I'll be back for the questions.
Outstanding. Thank you, John. I really appreciate, and I've never actually had to pick up after a good poisoning lead-in story, but I'll try my best. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Woody Thompson. I'm with RS&H, and I'm located in San Antonio, Texas. I'm a senior project manager here with RS&H, but over the span of my 30-year career, I have been involved with design. I've been heavily involved with all aspects of commissioning. I've been involved with aspects of facility condition assessments and energy audits and all the integral roles of how we improve our new and existing facilities, either through design or construction practices or all of the above. So my thanks to John, my thanks to Abraxas for inviting me to share a little bit of information in my perspective about retro commissioning, a la existing building commissioning, and the application of those services in energy savings performance contracting. And to understand the application, you've got to really understand the process. And that's going to be, I'm going to be very heavily focused today on the retro commissioning process. And as we go through, hopefully you'll see that there is a relationship there between most of the activities that are involved in retro commissioning in performance contracting. And hopefully after this presentation, you'll understand that illustration. So again, I'm Woody Thompson, your presenter today and John, again, thank you for the invitation. So what am I trying to accomplish today? Well, we're going to go over the process of retro commissioning. I want to understand the standards, the references, the benefits, and what is retro commissioning in performance contracts? What am I talking about here? And I'm going to be referring back to some experiences. Obviously, you know, you learn by doing, and there's war stories that go with that. And I'm going to be sprinkling some of those throughout this presentation. And at the very end, give you a very small case study, what I like to call retro commissioning light, but it illustrates the importance of retro commissioning. And again, if you focus on retro commissioning, I want you to think, as I'm presenting today, optimization. Whether it's an optimization of the building at large, is it the optimization of a system, or with performance contracting, the optimization of the controls of those systems, especially in HVAC and lighting and other controls aspects. And also looking at the interoperability of these systems and how do we test and optimize those. So I've already given my introduction. The information I'm giving today is really good for all stakeholders and all those entities involved, from the design process, what I call cradle to grave, the design process all the way through the construction, and then the handoff of those facilities to facility managers, O&M staff, etc. And of course, those of us that are in the commissioning industry. This is a large, and I would say untapped resource that we have in the United States when you think about the sheer number of publicly and privately owned existing facilities that sorely lack optimization. And what's the whole point of our performance contracts? Is to optimize from an energy and resource standpoint. So right off the bat, there's a relationship there. So just like with any good presentation, you got to have a pop quiz right off the bat. And I want you to think about what your definition of retrocommissioning is. Whether you know anything about it or you're well-versed, what is your personal definition of retrocommissioning? But in light of today's subject, does it enhance performance contracting? Does it even have a role? Or is it a separate and distinct entity? I'm hopefully going to prove today that it is not, again, going through the retrocommissioning process. And what value does existing building commissioning have in performance contracting, if any? It may not. It may be just an added service. And if I'm an owner and I'm spending my money and I want to get the best investment or return on my investment, I want to know what value am I getting what I'm paying for. And that's the language of owners is the dollar sign. So think about these. How would you answer these? And we'll explore this again at the end of the presentation. Now let's get through some myths. And this is myths that have plagued commissioning as a whole, whether it's new construction or existing building, but specifically what it is. And what it isn't, it's not just solely construction administration or solely a construction or a design quality control function. Is it part of it? Can it enhance these things? Of course they can. It's not just a bunch of tests at the end of construction. If, again, the old adage, if I had a dime for every time we would get to 80% or 90% of construction and somebody would come to me and say, well, Woody, we're ready to commission this. Well, you're way too late. That should have happened all the way back at the charrette phase when the owner dreamt up that he wanted to optimize this facility or these systems. That's when commissioning begins, not at the very end when you're looking to get an occupancy permit or you're trying to satisfy some benchmarking requirement. It's not just test and balance or performance verification testing or part of a maintenance contract or just solely an energy audit and study. Now, do all these things that I just talked about, is it part of the commissioning, big umbrella, big C process? Well, yes, it is, but it's not the only thing. And again, when we're talking about the application of commissioning to performance contracting, you're going to need a lot of these things to verify if the ECMs that were proposed, designed, and implemented, do they actually have that return of energy savings that's promised in that contract? So let's talk about for those of you that have never read the bare bones definition of the commissioning process, this is straight out of ASHRAE Standard 202. It is, I'm not going to read it word for word on the screen, but I want you to focus on what I've highlighted. It's a quality-focused process. We are, commissioning is trying to ensure that what has been designed, what has been built, what is meant to be maintained over time has quality at the forefront. That is the focus from the inception all the way to application. Extremely important in performance contracting because we are developing a lot of measures to optimize from a utility standpoint, from an energy standpoint and resources. Well, if we don't have quality at the very beginning, we don't have that confidence throughout the lifespan of that contract that these good things are going to stick. But more importantly, the second part of this definition, to meet the owner's project requirements. And a lot of times in performance contract, what is the owner looking for? Hey, I spent this amount of money on resources over these last several years. I want to see those savings come to fruition over time. Did I get that? Did I get what was promised to me and I've paid for it? Well, in performance contracting, they're not paying for it, but whoever is responsible for that contract, are they getting the savings that they anticipated? Where the owner can sit back and say, okay, this was worth doing, or this is all just snake oil. So the benefits, some of it's I've picked up again, and you're going to get sick of me saying it today. Optimization. Do you have optimized systems for energy and utility savings? And another benefit is you have reduced operational carbon emissions. You have a higher quality product that lead to better owner, designer, and contractor reputations. And especially in the public sector, we're being good stewards of the taxpayer dollars in these facilities, so they not only meet their expected life cycle, but they can go beyond it. So we're stretching that taxpayer dollar. And that just leads to better reputations. You have a confident staff in maintaining those facilities. You get those budget savings over time in capital as well as operations. And of course, coming out of a pandemic, our buildings are becoming more healthier, which directly improves occupant productivity. All these things are so important. And one of the things that can be done is through this optimization process in retro commissioning. So there's a lot of nomenclature, a lot of acronyms. I'm only going to cover a few of the more prevalent ones that get confused. When you hear of commissioning, retro commissioning, recommissioning, commissioning is just basically, it's new buildings and or major renovations, where the owner sets out a certain project requirements and we try to meet that through our design and through our build activities. Now, this is where sometimes the waters get a little muddy, is what is retro commissioning versus recommissioning? Well, it's as basically as this. If it's retro, for whatever reason, that building or those systems were never originally commissioned in the first place, and at some point in the life cycle of that facility, the owner wakes up and says, wow, maybe I should have commissioned this way back when, and now I have an older facility that I want to implement some kind of performance contracting. What's a good way to smoke out the bugs in my existing facility? Do a retro commissioning activity. It'll help formulate those early ECMs to be explored to see if they're appropriate for implementation. Now, what's the difference between that and recommissioning? Well, recommissioning, again, is an existing building. It can be done anytime during the life cycle of that building or the major systems. But at some point, it was originally commissioned, but something had operationally changed. The mission of that facility had changed over time, where, to give an example for HVAC, your zoning isn't quite proper, or you've had such a point of degradation that your controls aren't as optimized as they should be, for whatever reason. So again, commissioning is new, retro commissioning is existing, but it was never really commissioned. Recommissioning, it's still existing, but we need to retool it, we need to refine it, we need to optimize what's going on. And again, thinking ongoing, long-term. Not just to squeeze the last 5 years out of the life cycle, but how much more can we get? And where can we focus on what are those systems that really need to be improved? So what can be retro commissioned? I used to think way back when, and I've been around the commissioning world for nearly 30 years now. The big focus was always HVAC and lighting and possibly domestic hot water. But now we are really getting into the building envelope. That's the big thing right there. And from my experience of working as commissioning services for ESPC activities, the building envelope, if controls was number one, building envelope is number two, especially when you look at the amount of energy that's spent in HVAC systems trying to regulate the environment for a leaky building. Well, if you don't seal up that building, you're beating your HVAC life cycle to death. But we can also do renewable energy systems, interoperable systems, another fast and up and coming part in the commissioning industry. Is don't just test systems in a vacuum, test them as they interact with each other, because a building all these systems have to interact if they're going to be, you get the optimal function from your facility. Well, when we do acceptance testing and functional testing, We got to focus on that interoperability. And of course, HVAC, lighting, plumbing, industrial life safety, security, conveyance, just about anything. But what's the caveat to that? And I always laugh a little bit when an owner talks about, well, I want total building commissioning, but I can't afford this, 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 and this. Well, then you're not really doing total building commissioning. So budget rears its ugly head. In performance contracts, you look at the risk analysis. The ESCO is taking on the risk. So how much of these systems do you want examined for development of ECMs a la retro commissioning is a major consideration. References, tons of references. I'm not going to go through these line by line, but just realize there's a lot of information out there covering a lot of different systems for commissioning as well as existing building commissioning. And as you go through, there's been the UFCs on the federal government side, the NIBS guideline, whole building design guides, SMACNA, the granddaddy of them all the Portland Energy Conservation Inc. from way back when, and numerous others. There's a ton of very readily available information on this process if you want to do a deep dive. So what is the process? It is a cradle to grave process. Why should we consider this process for performance contracts? I firmly believe that as we're looking at and examining an existing building and their systems, these can point us in the right direction to where do we spend our time and attention and investment for improvements. A lot of times, can we do turnkey operation improvements? I'm looking at you, control systems, and to help get that early return on investments over the time period of that performance contract. So as you can see here, it is a very linear 5-stage process from pre-planning, planning, investigation, implementation, and handoff. And I'd like to say, if I can be so bold, that our involvement with ESPCs, we have approached that cradle to grave where we become the insurance policy for the implementation of whatever ECMs were developed and agreed upon by the owner. So the very first phase is your pre-planning and contract phase. This is where we're really thinking about what should be the scope of the retro commissioning process. And as an owner or an ESCO, do I need to hire a direct consulting service? Do I really need Woody? Or can I do this in-house? Or can I work hand in hand with an owner's facility staff? Now, facility staffs, usually they're putting out fires. They don't have the extra time. They don't have the extra resources or personnel. So doing the turnkey discovery and repair may be appropriate, but you may be running into a resource issue to do that. But whether you can do it in-house or you have to hire a direct consultant, this is the time to think about it. Not after you've already thought about the ECMs and approved, and definitely not after you started implementing. Do it as early as possible so you can explore all options. And that's when you start doing your very early examination of what makes good candidate buildings. Because usually in performance contracts, we're not dealing with a singular building, we're dealing with a campus of buildings, especially for the federal government. I do quite a bit with DoD. I had a performance contract where we explored 200 to 250 buildings. Some of those buildings we disqualified right off the bat because either the age of the systems were so old that we just couldn't get there, or it just didn't make any sense for the priorities of that particular military installation in terms of mission requirements. So you'll start looking at possible candidate buildings, and even then maybe systems within buildings. You may have a campus of buildings that the HVAC rocks, and it's great, but the lighting controls are a nightmare, or the roofs are all leaking, So you can even fine tune it down to what elements within that building really need attention. You start thinking about what is that proposal development? How does this affect my performance contract? And then agreeing with the owner from a very initial planning stage. How does this affect contract language going forward? And more importantly, expectations at the end of that life of the contract. So again, we start doing that pre-site investigation, excuse me, getting as much existing information as possible before we start doing a deep dive. And again, just looking at utility bills, work orders, maintenance lists will really guide you into where the attention should be. But here's the most important part when we get into planning is understanding the current facility requirements. And a lot of times owners will say, I want to go back to the original design intent. That sounds great on the surface, but how you're using that facility currently today doesn't make much sense and doesn't really match up well with the original design intent. So we're going to talk a little bit about that current facility requirement because this is going to be the driving force, the guidepost to ECM development. And from there, we start developing the retro commissioning plan. What are we going to do? What are we going to focus on? We're going to really start analyzing utility usage today, not historic, but today, because again, if we don't understand that benchmark of what we're spending today, how can we even predict what the savings will be? And then you really, and I think this is one of the most important parts when our planning and pre-site investigation, interview the people that work and live there, not just the maintenance staff, even though they know quite a bit, but talk to the people that spend all their time there. Usually an indicator of what's going on, focusing on indoor environmental quality, is when you have a lot of staff within that facility that have a lot of upper respiratory problems, a lot of sick days, a lot of sick calls, except for that one individual whose office, her entire office is cradle to grave of fresh, lush plants. That's usually the canary in the cave that tells you you've got a severe air quality issue within that facility. So walk around, talk to people, don't just talk to the owners, don't just talk to the O&M staff, talk to the people that gotta live and work there because they'll tell you where everything is. And then again, getting back to look at what is the current facility requirements. Okay, I've mentioned it a couple of times, but what is a CFR? The starting point may be from the original OPR when it was, maybe first commissioned, or the first design documents to kind of give you, this was our starting point. What changed so much in this facility from day one to now year 10? And you modify that. You really look at it as you would developing an owner's project requirements, an OPR, at the functional requirements of that existing building. How can you understand the scheduling of systems if you don't understand when that facility will be occupied, as an example? What are some of the sustainability aspects? Are they still viable? Did they install a bunch of solar panels, but none of the collectors work much anymore because they've degraded so badly due to lack of maintenance? What is the envelope? What is the functional aspects of the HVAC and refrigeration as appropriate? What is the electrical lighting? What is the water usage? How is the O&M implemented? Are they just putting out a lot of fires? Can they be proactive in some of their inspections to reduce equipment downtime? All these things are important from a performance contract aspect because it may boil down to as simple as your scheduling is all wrong, or your controls do not match what you really need, or you put so many systems in hand and out of auto that you're not gleaning the efficiencies out of the operation of these systems that you may have once had. Doing a really deep dive current facility requirement document will, again, be the guideposts of where our ECM development should be. So that's when we get into this investigation analysis phase. It's I can't emphasize enough, it's an in-depth examination and testing of all the building systems that we suspect have degraded to a point that they need optimization, or the systems are running good, but maybe we can glean out a little bit more efficiencies. So we can analyze those issues found, provide recommendations, confirm the CFR, modify as needed, and if possible, implement or enlist O&M staff assistance in doing this investigation. So you do these investigations, and you can use data loggers. You can start gathering as much data as you can using specialized equipment, all very important information, and even information that you could compare to original design calcs to see how far have we drifted from day one. And then we can start doing functional tests, and in those functional tests, provide quick fixes. That's that turnkey find and fix type considerations, which may be readily available. And that way, from a performance contract standpoint, you're already immediately starting to gain the benefits of taking care of something in year one of your 20-year contract instead of year 10. Recommend problem resolution, i.e. develop ECMs at this point, those energy conservation measures and ECOs, opportunities, and then package this all up in an investigation corrective action report. This report is extremely important because it will dictate where do we want to go from here. And this may be, again, from a risk analysis standpoint of ESPCs, what can we afford to do now? What can we not afford to do without maybe talking about some capital investment from the client? Or is these nice to haves for future consideration and future projects? So an investigative report, I kind of went through this in a nutshell. It's all the information that you've done from your pre-investigation, your deep dive investigation, your staff interviews, your analysis of documentation, all the way up. It's all in one nice package to be referenced, not to just be put on a shelf, but to be referenced throughout the rest of the performance contract. Why? Because we want to make sure that we're not missing anything, or maybe what we thought was a consideration early on really wasn't needed, and we realized that in time. I think what's more important also is my last bullet here is an anticipated implementation schedule. If you're dealing with things that you'd like to do, but the implementation period, because of long lead items due to procurement, gets in the way, or due to the occupancy of that facility, it can never go down for any reason, may preclude you from doing some of the things you'd like to do, even though the benefit is energy savings, which equates to dollar savings for the owner. So, but we've gotten to the implementation phase. And I'll tell you, the one thing that prevents you from going from the investigation phase to the implementation phase is sticker shock. Now, this may not be so much in performance contracting, but it's definitely when an owner just wants, hey, my building was never commissioned, I want you to retro commission, and we give them the investigation, we give them the current CFR, and then next to it is the a la carte menu of items that should have been implemented, and this is how much it's going to cost you, and they're going to focus right with return on investment. And if they can't get a return on investment at a rate that they're comfortable with, and I'll tell you something, if they expected to get a return within 7 years and you're telling them it's going to take them 12 to 15 plus years, they're going to say, no, we're not going to implement that. And I've had projects where we've gone through all the way up to implementation phase, and the report sits on a shelf because of lack of funding. It's sad, but it happens. And if that does happen, we always warn the owner, there is a shelf life to this investigation because the facility is still going to run, which means if the facility is still running, it's still going to degrade. The systems are still going to degrade. So it turns into the adage of pay now or pay a whole hell of a lot more later. But again, that's an owner decision. So going into retro commissioning, always realize the implementation phase could be a stopping point for the whole process. But let's implement it. And decisions have to be made. Can the owner do it within their own staff? Do I need to do design activities, which means I've got to think about a design build or a design bid build? Or can I do a turnkey operation where I can get a good contractor to find and fix, working hand in hand with our retro commissioning providers to implement some of the low-hanging fruit, all of the above, depending upon the magnitude of those improvements that are up for recommended implementation. And we do remedial designs, but also what's important, and this goes especially important in performance contracting. Okay, we went through this, we developed the CFR, we developed ECMs, the ECMs were accepted, we implemented them, but we didn't go back to look at, were they installed properly? Was the fix properly done or complete? Or did we come back in 1 year after implementation? Sometimes 5 years after implementation to say, hey, is the prediction that we made way back when, that was the basis and core of developing the CCM and ROI, did it stick? And if you don't go back and check, how will you ever know, other than over time you notice, wow, I was getting a 5% utility savings in year 1 through 4, but I'm on year 5 and now I'm starting to slowly tick up. What's going on? What's changed? So having these commissioning and retro commissioning activities down the road will, again, is that insurance that what you've done is sticking. So at this point, after you've implemented, you hand off, you validate the performance after correction actions are made. More importantly, conduct the lessons learned that can be applied for the next building on that campus, or can be applied to that next campus of buildings, whether it be a university or a military installation or what have you. But take those lessons learned so you're not repeating history all the time, but more importantly, how do you avoid the pitfalls? What really didn't work out? What was a red herring? We thought it was a big deal, but it turned out it wasn't. Having a lessons learned documentation with a workshop really helps with future planning. Verify that the O&M staff is properly trained, especially if you're implementing new systems. This is especially true in new controls software. Do you understand the changes we've made to the graphic user interfaces and controls? And then again, recommend those periodic evaluations. And as with everything in the commissioning world, it's all on paper. We gather all the data and we submit it. That way, it's always at the fingertips for future projects and current operations and maintenance activities. So, energy audits versus retro commissioning. And this is where I want to draw a distinction, because sometimes people will do an energy audit. This happens in ESCO type activities, and they think we're done. And you're mostly there, but not in my recommendation, you're not completely there. You investigate what's there, what's happening. It's a good activity for benchmarking. It tells you the starting point of where do we go from here, and determine if what the system you have can be improved economically, not just from a utility standpoint, but from a billing standpoint, from a paying standpoint. One thing I failed to mention, one savings right off the bat is look at your local utility provider and look at the rates that they're charging the owner and see, are there negotiations that can be done that better suit the usage of that client? And those rates may not have been negotiated 10, 15, 20 years ago. So, but ultimately an energy audit should be part of the implementation documentation similar and can complement a retro commissioning plan. Now, retro commissioning, like I said at the very beginning of this presentation, performed on existing buildings, but it doesn't matter whether they're new or old. I've retro commissioned a building that was less than a year old because they realized we never commissioned it. And here we are getting close to the end of warranty or beyond, just beyond warranty. We got all sorts of problems. Why? And that's the biggest question owners have. Why? I thought I spent all this money on good reputable designers, good reputable contractors. Not saying they're not reputable, but something got missed that an owner's expectation in facility cost, specifically utility cost, did not quite meet their expectations. So they get this feeling they didn't get what they paid for. So when you combine energy audits with retro commissioning activities, especially in performance contracting as a tool of performance contracting, you'll have a direct positive effect on your contract and the predictive energy savings, which for the ESCO makes them happy because they're assuming all the risk through the life of that contract. And ultimately it makes the owner happy. And when the owner's happy, they're going to say, hey, I want these people at my next project. And I'm going to recommend these people at my next project because they gave me what I paid for. Small case study. This is real world. I'm not going to name. It was a public client. I'm not going to name the agency, but this was a natatorium, a very specialized natatorium. It wasn't just for recreational swimming. This was a scientific application to test people within various pools and whirlpools. They were having all sorts of excessive humidity issues, thermal load issues. The HVAC throughout the facility was poor. And to understand the facility, not only did it have a part with whirlpools and indoor pools, but it had a gym next to it. It had offices next to it. It had a pure testing lab, all within the same facility. So you can imagine the zoning on this was very complex. Lot of different humidity and pressurization type considerations throughout this facility. Within the 5 years of the life of this facility, things were going bad. And talking to the managers of this facility, they were going south from day one. Now you notice on this slide what I've got in bold. This was a LEED Gold certified building. And sometimes this is an illustration of you have to be careful of facility benchmarking, whether it's LEED or Green Globes or Inspire or whatever, BREEAM. Just because it's a whatever certified facility does not necessarily mean it doesn't have problems. So this facility had all kinds of problems. And so the client brought us in originally to do some diagnostic testing. They didn't call it retro commissioning, but that's what it turned out to be. And so we walked in, we did a detailed analysis of the existing system's performance, did some detailed functional testing to find out what's really going on here. We took a look at the original design documentation because, again, this building is only 5 years old. And at this point, we started diving deeper and deeper. We started realizing that there was a multiple domino effect of shortfalls that, like a snowball rolling downhill, just got bigger and bigger and bigger to where this facility became at a point uninhabitable and couldn't meet the mission of doing diagnostic testing of health performance. So we had to do a thorough audit of not just the HVAC systems, but the building itself. We interviewed the occupants. We had to do what we thought was just light forensic engineering to some very deep forensic engineering, to the point of, if you see the picture there, you see a fan-powered box. There were 32 fan-powered boxes in this facility. And if you look at that, you see some ductwork running into the back and through a filter. Wrapped around that filter was a plastic garbage trash can that you would have in your typical office garbage cans. And you can see behind it, yes, that filter is black as night. And we found this not just in one fan-powered box, we found it in all 32 fan-powered boxes. So you can imagine there was absolutely no airflow being returned to those fan-powered boxes throughout the facility. Once we called the facility managers and pointed this out to them, they were shocked. They were completely shocked. And again, this building was not a standalone building. It was part one building of a campus of buildings, which immediately got them thinking, how many other places where we're having issues with HVAC have this type of situation? Now, this wasn't the sole cause. There were a lot of other causes, but this was the most obvious of poking our head above the ceiling and saying, oh, that's odd. So we also looked at the original design. We realized that the design of the air handler that served the natatorium areas had which has a much higher than latent load than your typical office type facility. Well, they were designed at office and not specifically for natatorium type facilities. So in other words, the design did not meet the mission requirements of the building from an air handler standpoint, which means they had a much smaller air handler than what they originally needed and practically no humidity control. We found some other issues with zoning. We found issues with controls, sensors that were completely inoperable. And we compared the test and balance report, and we brought an HVAC test and balance firm with us to do this forensic testing, and realized that the balance report did not match at all what we found when we did our own sampling of airflows at the registers and even at the discharge of the air handlers. So, giving you a lot of information about retro commissioning, about the process, and how it applies with performance contracts. Hopefully I've given you something to think about. And I'd like you to go back and think about your original definition of retro commissioning. Has it changed? And even if it did, more importantly, have I made the case today that it does enhance performance contracting, or it has the potential to enhance performance contracting? And with that, does it bring value? I think it does. Unfortunately, there's a lot of the industry that still thinks that commissioning is snake oil. I think it's because we don't educate owners well enough. We don't demonstrate that the returns of investment of these activities are worth the investment. And I would challenge you, and this is a person who has been very involved with ESPC projects, primarily for the federal government, for Department of Defense, that it does play a role, it does play a value. And I'd like you to think about, as an ESCO, it's an insurance policy. And with that said, I hope your answers have changed or evolved. And John, I don't know how we field questions, but we're at that point. And on the screen right now is more upcoming webinars for the next several months.
Okay, let's go to questions. First question I have is, okay, one thing I've noticed in my own doing of retro commissioning, you go and you do your initial study, you notice all these things, you look at the trend logs, you do point-to-point testing and all this stuff, and you say, yeah, this is how it's set. This is overridden, this is whatever, these are the set points, this isn't working. And then you come back for the implementation phase and things have changed.
Yep.
Yep. I mean, and that it makes you think, God, am I stupid? Did I do this wrong the first time? Oh, no, I guess I have proof. I did do it right. It just changes, and it makes you question the whole retro commissioning process of maybe this process really isn't that good, where we write a report and then we wait several months because they got to look, you got to write the report. That takes a month or so. And then they got to look at the report, which takes a month. And then they approve whatever you do. And then you go and fix it. And then it's like, oh, it's not what it was. And so somehow maybe that whole process should be fixed where you don't have that problem. Questions or answers or comments?
The answer to that is I experienced that when I years ago, I did several federal courthouses in the Southeast. And a lot of, we went through, we did our investigation, we did our recommendation, our implementation report. And the owner, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to take care of all this in-house, but I want you to come back. So to see that these were actually done, he gave it to his own O&M staff. And we would come back and some things would be done, or what they did, and I'm going to focus primarily on controls because this is where it happens. They decided to take everything, well, I'm just going to throw it in hand. If our controls aren't working right, I'll just let it run all the time, which is counterintuitive to what the owner wanted in the first darn place.
Yeah. But it meets the design conditions. Everything is running. Everybody's warm.
And it even got to the point that I had a federal judge kept a psychrometer in his chambers.
Crazy.
And if it hit a certain level, he was educated enough to know, hey, this is the set point for my chamber. It's not there. And he would threaten, no kidding, the O&M manager with contempt of court if they didn't meet those environmental criteria. So out of fear, the controls people, the facility staff would throw everything in.
Yeah, of course. That's what I do.
They didn't have the resources to do it right.
I'd still do it. Hell with it. When they start threatening to throw me in jail, it's like, okay, whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah, we had a situation in Bursa, Turkey. A friend of mine and I went and did an audit of a factory of textile plants, and we noticed they weren't using any heat recovery. There's textile plants. They're always heating all this stuff. They're throwing away all this hot water. It's like you could use this to preheat water, et cetera. And we said, you should do that. You gotta, we gave them some of our ECMs. We didn't give them everything. So we didn't want them to just say, okay, we got your information now, go away and don't ever come back, which is what they did. But so we come back, and I noticed it's like, look, I'm in the offices and there's like a fog in the offices. You couldn't see like you could before. There's a fog and it's this mist and it smells like chemicals, like dyes. And they had done some heat. They're really proud of themselves. They'd done this heat recovery and somehow used it on the air handlers somehow. And they're poisoning themselves with these chemicals in the offices. It was terrible. But anyway, yeah, they were proud. Okay, so I have a questions about the ESCOs. Now, how does this work with ESCOs? You explained the whole process, but how are ESCOs to use this? Because the whole ESCO process is a little different than we do the investigation report and then we do the,
I can only speak to the projects that I was involved with, but one of the toughest parts of working with an ESCO is they're thinking they get their money from long-term savings. We provide fixed firm price services.
Right, that's federal stuff, right?
So they've got to be willing to say, hey, I want to use you retro commissioning providers to help me develop kind of the implementation plan, develop the ECMs, calculate or justify the ROIs that we've already developed.
Mm-hmm.
But for us to be involved with that, we've got to have a very fixed scope of work. This is what we're going to do. And sometimes I've had to go to a not to exceed negotiation on these contracts because I can't, well, our firm has made the choice. If we're going to work with an ESCO, we can't be paid by long-term dollars. It's got to be a very clear, concise, this is what we can do.
Yes. No, certainly. I got that. No, that I understand. Yeah. So I guess I'll give you, we might have more experience with ESCOs than you. We might, I don't know. Yeah. So I think the way it works often with the ESCOs sometimes will hire us. I mean, look, this isn't a bidding contract or contest. We don't need to take your work. You don't need to take our, there's so much work. We don't care. So, but anyway, I think the way that RCX or retro commissioning or recommissioning is handled in the ESCO sphere is it's kind of like an energy audit. It's just you're looking at controls a lot more, and you might not do point-to-point testing. You might not do functional testing, or you'll do it sometimes, very targeted, but very little functional testing, not on everything. And you look at trend logs mostly, and you just look around. What's not looking right? You look at the BAS front end. It's like, oh my gosh, look at that. That's not working. That's not working. Look at this. But mostly, I think it's trend logs, and you can find out there's no lockout. They're not resetting. There's no setback. And why is this air handler running all the time? That's stupid. And that kind of stuff. And so then you come up with these measures. And so then it becomes, that's the thing about retro commissioning. It's like, it means so many different things. You explain the process, how the federal government mostly does it, and some other customers like maybe universities and stuff, where there's all these different steps. Whereas, the utilities, they just treat it like, utility programs, it's kind of like an energy audit. You do an energy audit and you fix some stuff and then we're done and that's it. And then right? And that's a really abbreviated, it's the McDonald's version. And the ESCOs kind of do a McDonald's version too, except for that's where they come in, they run into trouble, is they do it the McDonald's version, like, yeah, we did this. We scheduled all the scrap, we fixed the economizers, we have night setbacks now, all this cool stuff we did. And then you wait 3 months or 6 months and it's all, not all, but a lot of it's broken again. It's back to it. We're running 24/7 and there are no setbacks. And so then they guaranteed the savings and they're not getting it. They're not getting it. And I'm doing a lot of M&B for some ESCOs, and part of my job involves, looking at trend logs. In fact, it makes me bleary-eyed looking at trend logs and evaluating, is this working? No. That's what I'm seeing. It's like, 65 to 90% of the strategies they put in are not working. This is after, several years, they're not working. And so what's the problem? Is it because the O&M staff are boneheads? No, maybe they're short-staffed. I think the problem is that the ESCOs aren't handling retro commissioning correctly. If you want to do retro commissioning, you have to keep showing up every year or maybe every quarter, and go and look through, maybe not all the controls, but maybe a couple buildings this quarter, 2 other buildings next quarter, whatever, and then work with the staff to fix some of these things. It's like, we need to take these overrides back off. Okay, can you handle that? Yes, I can. Okay, good. And then you can keep your savings. But that's the trick, is that you can't just do it and leave, because you're going to get screwed.
And I agree. I have been, I've provided these services where they were hyper focused on controls. Let's get our controls straight. And once they got the controls straight, it started smoking out other issues in other systems for whatever the various reasons are, which means I think a lot when we look at HVAC controls or controls in general, interoperable controls, it's not the end all be all answer. It's not the silver bullet. It's a starting point. Because you're going to have to consider, you may have to invest in better equipment because it's at various levels of degradation, especially in HVAC systems that have enthalpy wheels, or those systems that have a lot of maintenance activities. If you ignore that side of the equation, your best controls in the world aren't going to overcome those shortcomings.
No, that's all true. Yeah, and I think that unfortunately a lot of what we know is going to go away, because I think, so let's say you're an ESCO, and you want to do, I really think every ESCO should have retro commissioning or recommissioning or existing building commissioning, whatever you want to call it, should be in every performance contract. It should, but it only works if you've got staff that's knowledgeable enough. They've got to be smart, and a lot of ESCOs don't have that. And they got smart enough staff who have enough time, they also don't have that, to go into the buildings and work with the clients, and they have to keep providing value. I mean, and that's such an awful word. I don't like that, providing value, but being with the clients and saying, look, here's one really good approach that I saw. There's a company called Data Pulse, which I don't think they exist anymore, or maybe they got bought, but they gave a great presentation about maybe 8 years ago at World Energy Congress. And they said, look, this is how we handle it. We have this big university. What we do is today, we'll show up today. Today we show up, and today we're only doing scheduling. There's 6 million different controls issues to deal with. You show them all the issues, like let's say from SkySpark or something. O&M staff isn't going to do any of them. It's just too many. It's too daunting. But if you have one thing to do, we're only doing scheduling today. Here, I made a list. Here's 29 air handlers you can turn off. Okay, let's do that. That's what we'll do. Next week I'll be back and we're going to work on something else. And you do one thing at a time. Now, if you can do something like that as an ESCO, you can keep it working. You know, it's just but the thing is, the whole ESCO needs to understand, not just the M&V staff, because no one listens to them anyway. You need the salesmen to understand so that they could put that into the contract. There's this extra hours, you know, this extra O&M time, and that could be profitable if we have extra time. Granted, then your retro commissioning isn't going to have a 2-year payback anymore. It might be a 4-year payback, but still, it's still a good project.
But it's still palatable. As long as you can get, you know, as long as it's not kicked from 2 years to 15 years, you're still making money.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to look through some of these questions here. How do you see this working in performance contract? Is pre-planning, is the planning phase typically during the IGA? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and so I personally, maybe I'm wrong, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong, Woody, but I think that the model you explained doesn't necessarily or need not necessarily correspond to the performance contracting cycle. I don't think so. Yes, you can say your planning phase is the IGA. Okay, implementation phase is the implementation. I guess you could say that. I guess so. I guess you could do that. And then, of course, you have to, like you said, you have to go back and make sure they installed it all right. And they don't. They don't. I think I can guarantee you there will be problems with every retro commissioning project you do. But the controls people always screw it up. So yeah, I guess you can. Your project does overlay right on top of the performance contracting. So I'll take that back.
You know, and to be honest, I've had a performance contract where they didn't bring us in at the investigation or pre-planning or anything. They only brought us in when they were at the point of ready to implement. They said, hey, could you review our ECMs we've already developed and the owners approved? Did you see any problems? But we really want you to verify functional. We want you to verify installation and functional testing after the fact. Mm-hmm. We said, if that's all you want to hire us for, we can do that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So this one, puzzles, it still puzzles me why RCX is not more common at ESPC projects. Well, gosh, I could have written this question. What's the disconnect? I didn't think it was a lack of interest in the process. It seems like something else, a level of complexity. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe it is. Lack of faith and persistence. Yeah, I think that's I think that's mostly what it is.
Yeah.
Nice question, Elliot, because that's exactly what I would have asked. Okay, so then let's see, there's a couple other things I wanted to ask you. So, you know, I find the whole training thing, it's just something I could never wrap my head around. So now I'm going back, not to the ESCO world, but to your world, the federal world, where you're supposed to do training. And so what you do, you get in front of 5 or 10 maintenance people, maybe 12, and you explain, look, this is how it works. You have a hot call or cool call, don't change the chill water supply temperature, change this instead, okay? Okay, I got that. And then you film it or you video it. So then they have these videos and you have it written in manuals. But the thing is, guys aren't going to watch, a year from now, they'll forget the videos existed, the manuals collected dust, maybe they don't even exist anymore. If they do, no one knows where they are.
Yep. Sadly, training and I'm speaking solely on the federal side, training is only as good as the installation itself. Sometimes it's treated as a check the box exercise.
Yes.
Mostly, not all, but mostly it's, hey, it was a requirement, we did it, we got proof, here's a video, and then it's for now.
Great. Another question I have is, why can't you have, so guys are doing these, to fix the hot and cold issues or whatever, they'll do an override of something, right? Let's close the outside air dampers because it's so dang cold outside and we can't get the classroom the temperature. We'll just close the outside air. We'll just do that for the day or two because it's, it's cold for these next 2 days. But they forget to release the override. So my question is, why don't control systems have when you set an override, some automatic control that will release it in 24 hours. Or maybe it would say, when do you want to release this? In 2 hours, 24 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, 2 days. And they get maybe just those options instead of forever or 3 months. Why doesn't that exist?
It does exist. I had a project where it was a comprehensive, this was a private sector client. They were willing to spend the money primarily on controls to when there was an alarm or there was an indicator that something went into hand, it actually to the facility manager said after a certain set period, hey, this is still in hand. This is still overrid. Do you want to continue? And so what's my point? The owner was willing to pay for that level of programming within their control system.
But why do they have to program it? Why can't that just be built in? That should just be built in. I guess you're not the program, you're not the vendor. You don't design Metasys, so you can't answer for JCI.
No, and I look at it this way. Oh, that's a nice to have. I can charge you more money for it.
Well, they should do it. That's like airbags. It's a nice to have, but now everybody has to pay more money.
That's a marketing question.
Yeah, that's stupid. But now, okay. But now with AI, this is all. I think 10 years from now, this whole industry's gone. I think it's gone. You buy that?
No. I think AI is going to be a good starting point, but I would like to think there's always going to be that level of doubt of who verifies AI is correct. And I hope we don't get so complacent. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an engineering design example. When we have a young engineer sizing the proper tonnage for HVAC, they usually use a computerized program. But do they do the back of the envelope by hand that we learned in school? What is the sensible load? What is the latent load? Can you get kind of a smell test? AI said this. Yeah, but does it really make sense? So I think completely trusting AI for some of this, I hope we don't get to that point.
We will. We will. I'd like to bet you a bunch of steaks on that.
No.
Okay. Well, I think we nailed it. Let me see if there's any more questions. Otherwise, we're going to go. Oh, here's one. Tritium Niagara controls, when you set an override, it will give you an option for how long it's overridden. At least that's typically how we have it done. Well, nice job. Who told me that? Thank you, Brian. Appreciate
excellent.
that.
Thank you.
Okay, so we all learned something. Okay. Yeah, so there you go. It just seems so obvious, but I mean, how performance contractors should integrate RCX. It's so obvious. It should be in every project. And even if there isn't a BAS, there's still RCX to be done. But that aside, it's obvious it should be done. It's just that the people are not doing it correctly by having you continue to show up every quarter or so and screw with the controls. And it just helps the performance contractor, because if your people are good, which they have to be good, and sociable or nice people, you're going to develop a relationship with the O&M staff who are going to love you instead of bad mouthing. Oh, those guys, they suck. They just took our money. Instead, they're going to be like, yeah, they're great. I mean, they showed us all these neat things. They're always teaching us things. It's like, I don't know, and then you being on site all the time, you always have opportunity to find new things. Oh, that's broken, huh? We can probably fix that for you. But anyway, it'd be so smart for performance contractors. It's like doing your oil changes, right, at the dealership. Why are they so cheap? Because then they know you're going to come for the big maintenance issues, and they're going to make their money there. That's what this is. It's the oil change, and they just don't get it.
Yep.
But okay, let me see if there's any more questions. I think that's it. Okay, we're done. Hey, Woody, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. And if anyone has questions, you can contact us at webinars@abraxasenergy.com. And Woody, you work for RS&H, is that correct?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, so it's RS&H. They do retro commissioning, not just for the federal government, they'll do it for anybody. If you have a university, a city, probably a hospital, they'll probably do it for you. Good. Thanks, everyone. And please don't forget my Substack. Come join me. Bye.
Will do. Bye now.